Singapore's journey is one of the most unlikely success stories in modern history. In less than half a century, a tiny island with no natural resources transformed itself into one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Today, the average citizen in Singapore enjoys a higher standard of living than many people in far larger and resource-rich countries. But this outcome was never guaranteed. In fact, during the mid-1960s, many believed Singapore was finished before it even began. In 1965, Singapore found itself suddenly alone. It had been forced out of a political union, stripped of security guarantees, and left with almost nothing to rely on. The island was smaller than most global cities. Unemployment was widespread. Social tensions were high, and there was no meaningful military to protect its borders. The future looked bleak. How did a nation in such a fragile position manage to not only survive, but thrive? To understand that, we need to step back and look at how Singapore reached this breaking point. For centuries, Singapore was little more than a quiet fishing settlement. It held no obvious advantage until the early 19th century, when a British administrator recognized something others had overlooked. Singapore sat at a critical maritime crossroads, positioned perfectly between major global trade routes connecting Europe, India, and China. Ships passing between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea had little choice but to move through this narrow passage. Under British control, Singapore quickly evolved into a major trading hub. Immigrants from China, India, and the Malay world arrived in large numbers, seeking opportunity. The port flourished, commerce expanded, and the population exploded. While the wealth generated largely benefited the British Empire, Singapore itself became one of Asia's most active and diverse port cities. But this success rested on fragile foundations. During World War II, Singapore's defenses proved disastrously inadequate. Military planners had focused their attention on threats from the sea, assuming dense jungle terrain would be impassable. That assumption turned out to be fatal. Enemy forces advanced through the jungle, attacking from an unexpected direction. Within days, Singapore fell. The defeat shocked the world and shattered the illusion of imperial invincibility. The occupation that followed was harsh and unforgiving. Daily life became a struggle for survival. Food shortages, violence, and fear became part of everyday reality. Tens of thousands suffered or died. When the war ended and colonial rule returned, something fundamental had changed. The people of Singapore had witnessed the collapse of a supposedly unstoppable power. The belief that they needed foreign rulers to protect them was gone. Calls for self-rule grew stronger. However, Singapore faced a serious dilemma. It was small, resource-poor, and demographically different from its neighbors. As colonial powers prepared to withdraw, a solution was proposed. Merge Singapore with nearby territories to form a larger nation. On paper, it seemed practical. Singapore would gain access to land and resources, while its partners would benefit from its economic strength. In reality, deep political and ethnic tensions quickly surfaced. Disagreements over governance, economic policy, and social equality escalated. Violence broke out. Trust collapsed. Eventually, the union unraveled completely. In a dramatic decision, Singapore was expelled and forced into independence. The nation's leader addressed the public, visibly shaken. This was not a moment of celebration, it was a moment of fear. Independence had arrived not by choice, but by necessity. Singapore's challenges were overwhelming. No natural resources, limited access to fresh water, high unemployment, no meaningful military, an economy dependent on foreign forces that could leave at any time surrounded by larger, uncertain neighbors by any traditional measure. The odds were terrible, yet Singapore's leadership refused to accept failure. With no resources beneath the ground, Singapore had to invest in what it did have, its location and its people. The island doubled down on its role as a global trading hub. Ports were modernized, infrastructure expanded. Singapore positioned itself as the most efficient, reliable gateway between East and West. At the same time, critical internal problems were tackled with urgency. Water security became a top priority. Its massive investment went into reservoirs, rainwater collection, and advanced purification technologies. Self-reliance was non-negotiable. Economic policy broke with conventional wisdom. Instead of isolating itself, Singapore opened its doors to the world. Foreign investment was welcomed, corruption was aggressively eliminated, and laws were enforced with consistency. Goal was clear: become the safest and most efficient place on earth to do business. Housing was treated as a national emergency. Vast public housing projects transformed slums into modern neighborhoods. Citizens were encouraged to own their homes, tying personal stability directly to national success. Education became the foundation of everything. Schools expanded rapidly, and English was adopted as a common working language connecting Singapore to global commerce while maintaining cultural roots. Defense was built from scratch. Mandatory service ensured that the nation could protect itself. The message was simple: any threat would come at a high cost. Within a generation, the transformation was undeniable. Factories rose, trade surged, financial institutions followed. Singapore became one of the world's busiest ports and most important financial centers. Living standards soared, crime fell, education levels skyrocketed. Strict governance played a major role. Laws were enforced firmly. Public order was prioritized. Critics called the system authoritarian. Supporters pointed to clean streets, safety, and prosperity. The debate continues, but the results are impossible to ignore. By the end of the 20th century, Singapore had surpassed many former colonial powers in income and development. The nation had gone from near collapse to global influence in record time. When its founding leader passed away, the country paused to reflect. Opinions on his methods varied, but his impact was undeniable. Today, Singapore faces new challenges: an aging population, rising costs, and the pressures of globalization. But its foundation remains strong. The story of Singapore proves a powerful point. Even the most impossible situations can be overcome with discipline, long-term thinking, and absolute refusal to surrender. Once the world thought Singapore had no future, history proved otherwise.